The Ford Mustang Dark Horse. As Tracy Chapman would say, a fast car to be sure, but it's no GT500.
Look at that speed! 760 horsepower. Oh, I got him!
And it got embarrassed at U-Drags by a Chevy. So, we did the only logical thing you can do in this situation. We added power, and lots of it. Ford Performance tells us that its factory supercharger kit boosts the Dark Horse to over 800 horsepower. Now, if only there was a way to measure that sort of thing. We're Edmunds, and we test hundreds of cars each year on the road and at our private track, so you get the most trusted reviews. If you want to know which car, truck, or SUV is the best, then stick with us. So, how did we end up here? The Dark Horse is the fourth Mustang we've owned as a part of our one-year road test fleet of 20 or so vehicles that we use in the real world every day to let you know what they're like to live with and own. This thing arrived with big Shelby-sized shoes to fill because until recently, we owned a Shelby GT500 that we absolutely loved. So much so that we kept the thing for nearly 4 years instead of the usual one. To me, the Shelby is probably the most loved long-termer we've ever had in the Edmunds fleet.
It makes you giddy.
That engine, I mean, like, nothing kind of feels like that car.
We're selling it.
No, we're not. We're gonna miss her. Enter the Dark Horse, which was at the time and currently remains the pinnacle of the 7th gen Mustang lineup if you don't count the GTD. But if we're being honest, it didn't scratch the same itch when it arrived.
Come on, Mustang! Come on, old school! A clear victory for the Stingray. The Mustang is stung.
However, we are not ones to give up easily. The GT500, it had a supercharged V8. So we thought, hey, maybe if we add one of those things on top of the Dark Horse's V8, it might give it some of the same special sauce. So on went the official Ford Performance Supercharger kit, which includes a massive Whipple blower, aka supercharger, new intercooler, larger throttle body, and the fuel injectors off of said GT500. And so now our Dark Horse, we've put in just over 90 grand into it.
Ooh.
And according to Ford Performance, these additions should give the Dark Horse a massive 810 horsepower, 50 more than our old GT500, and biting at the ankles of the $328,000 Mustang GTD. And by the way, whether you're in the market for a supercar or a minivan, if you want to see pricing at dealers in your area or find out what your current car is worth, there are a couple of great tools on our site. So we took our car back to the track with all of that stuff installed, and it was still 0.2 slower to 60 than the Shelby and 0.3 slower in the quarter mile with a lower trap speed. Now, weirdly, the Dark Horse doesn't have launch control, but even considering that, we couldn't help shake the feeling that we aren't actually getting all of the power that was promised, and that is what the dyno is for. We're here at AM Dyno with Joe, and Joe is going to help us get those numbers on our Dark Horse today. Joe, thank you for having us. For those people who don't know, what is a dyno and what are we doing here?
Yeah, sure. So a dyno is essentially a machine that measures torque, and through torque and RPM, we're able to calculate how much horsepower the vehicle makes. In this particular case, we have a Dynojet to 224 LC, LC standing for low control, which it means it's got an eddy current braking system.
So then you're basically able to put some force into the wheel in the dyno, and that helps you to better measure how much power is getting put out to the wheels.
Yeah, so essentially it's like running up a hill and putting a 5-pound stack of potato on your back, you know, to try to feel the load of that. And it's just not free spinning. So it gives you a much more real wheel horsepower than a normal non-eddy current type of dyno.
Yeah, so the number that you're getting from a manufacturer, let's say, in this case Ford, They tell us that our Dark Horse with a supercharger on it is going to make 810 horsepower. That's measured at the flywheel or the crank. And we want to know is how much of that power is actually making it down to the wheels. So Joe, in your experience, what kind of loss should we be expecting from any kind of vehicle once it gets on the dyno?
Yeah, so flywheel number versus rear wheel horsepower number are very different simply because when they go and advertise these vehicles for sale, the higher the horsepower numbers, the more impressive it is. So what they do is they put the engine on an engine dyno, and that is what they call a flywheel dyno. Doesn't account for transmission, drive shaft, axles, tires, and all of that. And all of those components all put together creates what they call a drivetrain loss. A drivetrain loss is anywhere between 15 to 25%, depending on the size of the vehicle and even the weight.
Now, does the amount of loss that we're going to see differ because we have a supercharger on it? Is that going to make the loss number greater, you think, or is it going to be about the same?
There is a loss to having a supercharger on an engine. They call that a parasitic loss. So because the engine and through the crank has to turn the supercharger, it does have a little bit of a loss. But with a small base size vehicle, the loss I would still say would be on the lower side of a drivetrain loss.
How do you guys like select what gear to put it in? What's sort of the process for once it gets on there to actually get to the number that we want?
Right, so usually the transmission will dictate what gear you're gonna wanna run the vehicle in. On a Mustang like this, a 10-speed, the 1-to-1 gear is 7th gear.
7th gear, wow.
7th gear. It's gonna have a high mile per hour.
Okay, now when you say a 1-to-1, what does that mean?
So think of gear ratios kind of like a 10-speed on a bike. You start off with a smaller gear and then you work your way up. At one point, there's gonna be this 1-to-1 type of gearing.
Yes.
If you run the vehicle at a smaller gear, the car will rev really fast and your mile per hour will be very short.
Okay.
So like you might only hit 90 miles an hour, but in 7th, you're more like at 120, 130. We're trying to get a gear that's gonna allow the engine to be able to accelerate and then to actually complete within a good mile per hour.
Right.
And the manufacturer, actually, if you look it up, will tell you which gear is your 1-to-1 gear.
What is some of the safety stuff you have to do? How are you gonna load it in?
This is an above ground dyno. So what that means is we have to put a 4-post lift on front of it. You're not on the floor strapping cars and things like that. If something was to happen, it's kind of nice to happen up on top. Not that something's gonna happen here, but it is a good thing to have. And then lastly, we do rely on some fans just to help with getting some air past the engine and to just try to let it cool off.
All right, car's all hooked up. We're just about ready to go. Joe, before we begin, what is your guess as a professional as to what we might see out of the Dark Horse? Again, 810 horsepower is what Ford says with a supercharger installed. But what Joe says is?
I'm gonna say about 650.
650.
650.
So the over-under is 650.
Yeah.
Joe set the line. I'm going under just based on the performance that we've seen. But hey, let's run it and let's see what she does.
So I'm gonna do a 6-gear pull just to do a sanity check, make sure everything looks good, that the RPM is reading correctly. And then we'll do a 7th gear pull, which is the 1-to-1 gear.
Okay. Okay, we just did our 7th gear pull here with the Dark Horse. Joe, how did we do?
We did pretty good, pretty good. She made 630 horsepower.
630 horsepower, 629.69 if we're being exact, and 521 pounds-feet of torque. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, Joe, you said 650 and I said 630, so I'll expect my prize to be coming in the mail any day now. But if you've enjoyed this video, please throw us a like and subscribe. If you like Joe, please throw us a like and subscribe so we can keep making more of these things. Great to meet you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Back to the studio. All right, it's time to dissect these results a little bit. Now, because we know you're gonna ask, yes, we live in California, and that means we can only get 91 octane fuel, but Ford's power numbers, those are on 93 octane. So to get as close as possible, we tossed in a can of this to give us an apples to apples comparison. As a quick reminder, that big 7th gear pull got us these results: 630 horsepower and 520 pounds-feet of torque, numbers that are well below the quoted 810 horsepower and 615 pounds-feet of torque. Now, assuming a 15% loss would put horsepower at about 680, but the results that we saw indicated a much larger loss of about 22%. Yikes. It's also worth mentioning that this isn't the first supercharged Mustang we've put on a dyno. In 2013, we strapped down a Mustang Shelby GT500 and it pumped out 595 horsepower versus Ford's official number of 662 horsepower at the crank, and that was a loss of just 10%. So the question then is, where is all of our power going? Now, part of it likely has to do with the transmission. Non-dual clutch automatic transmissions with a torque converter, they can sap more power from the engine before it has a chance to reach the wheels. But there's potentially a much bigger issue. When I was going over the results of the testing with Joe, he also pointed out that our car is running a little rich. They attached a sensor to the exhaust and found an existing fuel-to-air ratio of around 0.75, and that indicates that not all of the fuel is being burned up in the engine and instead is making it out of the exhaust. A ratio of 0.85 would be a much better figure, and he guesstimated that with a tune, we could see much better numbers. Remember, our entire install was done by Ford experts to Ford specs, so we'll have to investigate if this is how the car is meant to run, and if so, why? Now, we reached out to Galpin and Whipple about the air-fuel ratio numbers, and Whipple got back to us and said that this was intentional, and that leaning it out by lowering the amount of fuel in the mixture wouldn't add any power, it would just make the exhaust gases burn hotter, and that might damage the catalytic converters, which you need, and which cost a whole bundle to replace. Their suggestion was to focus on higher octane fuel to improve performance, which of course we did. And they issued a gentle reminder that the tune also has to meet California emission standards, which was a not so subtle hint that this was about as good as things were going to get. We'll keep looking into this. Maybe next time we can try race gas. And please, if you enjoy following along with our year-long test fleet and all these shenanigans that we get up to with our cars, give us a like and subscribe. And if we get enough, they told me I could even slap a supercharger on one of our Moto Compactos, and that's a test I'd love to see. This also isn't the first time we've supercharged a car that we've owned, and there are more reasons to drop cash on a mod like this than just straight line performance. Way back in 2013 as well, we bought a Scion FRS, now known as the Toyota GR86, and supercharged it to get rid of the notorious power dip those cars had. We wound up with something that was only a few tenths quicker to 60, but it ended up being way more fun to drive. The same thing seems to be true of our Dark Horse. The supercharger, it hasn't made a massive difference to its straight line performance or given it the power output we hope to see, but we're still just getting started with this car, and we're hopeful that we'll find out that it's also much more fun to drive in the process. But if we're trying to get the absolute most out of this vehicle, it looks like our work isn't quite done. So stay tuned. Obviously, we're going to bring this thing back to you drags to see how much better it fares if you're racing to there and back. It'll go up against some fresh competition and potentially have a rematch against that Corvette. But we're also going to drive our supercharged Mustang every day in the real world to find out what it's like when you're slogging through traffic, picking up groceries, or taking it out for a weekend road trip. Lots to look forward to, and as always, thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.